Well, as I started with the conversation today, I said that I thought that for as long as I've been in this business, that has been a weakness within the logistics profession, that because the sales impact of what we're doing is hard to measure, we don't say that the service improvement has led to this kind of sales increase, and so the marketers gladly take credit for all the sales increases. So then that means that top management focuses on cost savings from logistics. Now, given that our view of supply chain management is that it's how you manage this network of companies that forms your supplier base and customer base. So for a company like a Colgate or a 3M, I suppose chains almost is not a great analogy in the sense that a chain has links and when you pull it tight it's straight. It's a good analogy in that CRM and SRM, in our view, form the links of the chain. But a supply chain for a company like a 3M or a Colgate that's positioned toward the middle of the supply chain looks much more like an uprooted tree. You pull a tree out of the ground, you shake the dirt off the roots, and 3M or Colgate is the trunk of the tree. The root system is the supplier network, and the branches on the tree are the customer network. So now the challenge here is which of those roots are worth going after, back to point of origin, and which of the branches are worth going after. Probably easier to see why we want to manage the branches out to the end point of consumption, because whoever has the relationship with that end consumer has got the power in the supply chain. So I think that we have to look at profitability. The way we measure performance and the links of the chain are how profitable am I selling to you, and how profitable are you as a wholesaler or retailer selling my product. Right? I think that is the absolute basis for negotiation. Now, if I'm selling undifferentiated commodities, like if Colgate changes the supplier of laminate for the toothpaste tubes, the consumer isn't going to know, right? So total delivered cost per unit is a decent enough measure for a supplier of undifferentiated commodities. But if I sell something to a wholesaler and the wholesaler resells it, they can put revenue against that, right? As well as cost. Now, it seems to me that a business is about two things. It's about customers, primarily two things. It's about customers. Which customers do you want to sell to, and what products or services do you want to sell them? And it seems to me an absolute basic requirement is being able to measure the profitability of those products or services, where you make decisions at the SKU level, and to be able to also measure the profitability of customers. What I find surprising is how many major corporations still do not possess that capability, that their accounting systems give them average cost reports that totally mask what's really going on in the business. Seems like if you and I are going to sit down and talk about process improvement, it's absolutely critical that you know what your numbers are and I know what my numbers are. Now, we may or may not want to open the kimonos and show all the numbers, but at the very least, we can talk about deltas. If we work on this CPFR application together, how are your costs going to change? How are my costs going to change? We need to understand that. We need to have an equitable split so we both come out ahead and we both have the incentive to want to do this. And I think ultimately the way you manage the supply chain is you manage it link by link, relationship by relationship. And that whether you and I decide we're going to work on process improvement and we're going to continue this thing long term, we're going to trust each other, we're going to share information, depends on the economic benefit that we each derive from doing so. If we can't measure that, we're dead in the water before we even start.
When you talk about SRMs, what relationship do SRMs have with the idea of alliances? In other words, are all supplier relationships alliances?
Oh, no. Good question. One of the problems, remember I said the first research we worked on was the partnership model? One of the problems with partnership is people use the words and see entirely different pictures, right? And that's another reason why there need to be common processes. If you're calling something a process and I'm calling something a process and we're using different names for the same thing, how do we communicate? And it's even worse if we're using the same name for different things, right? I mean, I go to Argentina. I went there 4 times last year. I've been once this year. We were trying to figure out the last trip, whether it was the 16th or 17th time I've been there. Now, I can speak Spanish well enough to order up a bottle of Luigi Bosco or a beef de lomo, but I can't do a seminar in Spanish, and so what we need to have is simultaneous translation for anybody who doesn't know English well enough to listen to me. So the problem, again, we've got is when we use words, it's absolutely critical that people see the same picture. So now you and I talk about a partnership, and the people in your company, when you use the word, might not even be seeing the same picture. And in my company, the same kind of thing. And so we both say we want a partnership. Well, one of the things we found is there's degrees of partnering. And to make it easier for people to kind of conceptualize this, we've broken them into 3 types: type 1, type 2, type 3. You can have small amount of partnering, you can have medium amount of partnering, you can have a large amount of partnering, and one of these sizes will fit any relationship that ought to be a partnership. But if I've got 100 suppliers, probably 70 of them I just write good contracts, cross all the T's, dot all the I's, periodically reassess whether we're getting a good deal. If we aren't, we try to negotiate a better one, and if we can't, we switch suppliers, right? I mean, I can go to any one of these overnight package services. They all basically do the same thing, right? So now, for those that ought to be partnership, we would say maybe 2 or 3 out of 100 are type 3. A handful of them would be type 2, and 20 some would be type 1. So point number 1 is, if I'm calling everybody a partner, I don't have a clue what's involved in partnership. Because everybody shouldn't be a partner. Everybody doesn't need to be a partner. We can have win-win business relationships without partnership. Okay? Now, again, this idea of seeing different pictures. You say you want to have a partnership with my company. I say I'd like to have a partnership with your company. I'm looking at just a little bit of partnering. You're thinking McDonald's, Coke, what we would call type 3. Well, we're both disappointed because you call all these meetings and I don't show up, right? And I said, well, I wanted a partnership with the guy, but I wish I hadn't said it because he's a pain, right? I mean, this is more closeness than I want. So one of the things we do as part of our partnership model, and we go through sessions of a day and a half where we facilitate going through these models, with the model with various corporations, like we're using it with the top 40 suppliers of Wendy's. We're using it with key suppliers to Master Foods and Colgate. We've used it with 2 divisions within International Paper that are owned by the same shareholder, but because these 2 divisions have their separate P&Ls and balance sheets, they don't act like they're owned by the same shareholders. The model is comprised of 4 things. Drivers, which are the compelling reasons to partner, and the strength of the drivers will determine how much partnering we ought to build in the relationship. If the drivers aren't there, forget partnership, right? So the notion here is that there should be incremental benefits for incremental closeness. Now, the next part of the model is something we call facilitators. That's how friendly the business environment is going to be to our union, right? I mean, do our cultures clash or do they mesh? If they clash, it's going to prevent us from achieving some of those drivers. We could have strong drivers and still never get there because our cultures clash. Our management philosophies and operating techniques are different. I'm willing to think long term. I'm privately held. You're publicly held, and the pressure's on at the end of every quarter. So you'll be a good partner as long as quarterly earnings are up. But the first time you have a bad quarter, forget it, right? So based on drivers and facilitators, we determine the potential for partnership. Based on the potential, you implement the management components of partnership differently. You implement planning differently. You implement the planning differently in terms of the kinds of things you plan, the kinds of things we're willing to share, whether we tie our planning together, whether you add capacity based on my plans for expanding my business, or whether we just tell each other what we're doing. So if I'm growing my business more than you're growing your ability to supply me, at least I know I need another supplier before you can't ship me, right? So that we're going to implement different kinds of metrics. The contract will look different. The way we share risks and rewards will be different based on how we implement the management components. So drivers and facilitators tell us the potential for partnership. The management components are the things we do in the two companies that determine what we actually get. So we can have great potential and mess it up because we implement the management components improperly, right? And then the fourth part of the model we call outcomes, and that's the extent to which each party has achieved their drivers. So when we go through a partnership session, we spend a half a day with each of the two companies, getting them to articulate their business reasons for wanting a closer relationship with the other side. Then we bring them together and they have to present to each other. Now see, one of the reasons why partnerships fail, one of the primary reasons, is that one or both parties have unrealistic expectations going into it. So what we're doing here is we're setting expectations. So when we do a session at Wendy's, if somebody says, my reason for wanting a closer relationship with Wendy's is I'd like the Tim Horton business, Judy Hollis, the senior VP, has to say, look, those decisions are made in Canada. One day they might be made in Dublin, Ohio, but they're not now, and you take that off the table. Okay? So there's no misunderstanding about what's possible. And if I listen to you present why you want a closer relationship with me, and I don't understand how I can help you get there, then I need to get you to explain why you think I can help you. And then if I'm not prepared to help you do that, I need to say, that's not going to happen. If I listen to you present, I don't challenge anything you present, rules of the game, I've bought on and I'm obligated to help you get what you think you're going to get.